Welcome to the Femsplainers. I'm Christina Hoff Summers.
And I'm Danielle Crittenden. I'm going to start saying it like you, Christina. And we're in the studio with Zoe Appler.
Zoe.
Hello. I feel like there's a full stop period at the end of every
Don't
word.
say period. Don't
say
period.
We've already learned that from busy
cousin of the comma. That's what we'll call it.
And if we say colon, then they're going to think we're talking about our bowels. So punctuation is now off topic.
Off topic.
But we have such a good guest this week that we're so excited about. A woman called Bridget Phetasy. And she's kind of, can I just say, she's become kind of like a hot thing on the intellectual dark web amongst the men and the mansplainers.
Men do love her.
And why not?
But we love her more.
Well,
and we'll take better care of her.
They get her talking about, how she's moved from the left to the center, or sometimes conservatism. And what they really like about her is, aside from her being, can we just say, very attractive, that she's this incredibly thoughtful, non-ideological person who is writing about the sexes and relationships and her own story from a drug addict to a sober person in very realistic ways. So she's just the main thing, and she's funny, and she's just refreshing
and non-ideological.
Yeah, that's
she hasn't
key word.
She did not major in gender studies at Oberlin,
but she's also not. She's not a product of any side, and that's what we love here. She's like, she calls herself politically homeless. That we're all feeling a little reeling from who we identify with right now, But before we get to her, so if the theme is going to be kind of about relationships, the story I wanted to talk about this week, which is a little old, it's been out, I'm not going to lie, for a month in the Atlantic, but it's been on my little docket to get to. It was called What Does It Mean to Be Ready for a Relationship by Julie Beck. And again, it was in the Atlantic. And this is something I think about all the time, that this is a phrase we hear all the time. Are you ready, and what do you need to be ready in a relationship? It's like you have to tidy yourself up like a house, like ready for a house showing. I guess you have to put scented candles around yourself and put flowers on yourself. So Julie wrote, the idea of being ready for a relationship is both ubiquitous and vague. Readiness is a well-worn T-shirt people put on and take off over and over again throughout their dating life. And then she points out that, but this phrase only really entered our lexicon in the 80s when it really took off. So it's a kind of, at a time when people are ceasing more and more to get married and kind of hitting its payload now with the millennials, that it's become what Kate Julian, and we had Kate Julian on when she had her article about the millennial sex recession and how they're not like pandas. They're not reproducing.
They are like pandas.
They are like pandas.
There's no babies.
And she called this a kind of sexual stunting, the sex that there are all these excuses now about, I can't have a relationship until, I don't have this. It's like a job, it's like being ready for a career or something.
Like getting your resume organized.
Yeah, so I find that really interesting. And I don't know, Christina, what do you think it means to be quote unquote ready for a relationship?
Probably that you're like getting old.
Too old, but then you're too old.
You're too old. Because what does that mean if you're human and you're young? You're ready for a relationship. You're always wanting to meet someone unless you're wifed up, husband up.
But it's also, it takes away, what I sense is that all spontaneity has been taken away. And maybe this is part of dating apps, where you're just presented with this cornucopia of choice. You could find someone that you think looks promising, but then there could be someone else down the road. It's like some, I don't know, Uber Eats that, maybe, but I want Vietnamese tomorrow. And we're not allowing for any spontaneity. We're not allowing for meeting people in real life. And then when we do meet people, we're very suspicious and mistrustful and maybe a little informed by our views that may or may not be true of the opposite sex.
I remember reading someone who was in the aftermath of Me Too remembered that she met her husband in an elevator, that he sort of talked her up or chatted her up, and they're married. They madly in love. But she said now she'd think he was a sociopath because this was, 20 years ago.
I had forgotten the story till you said that. The most romantic story of someone meeting in that way was, and this happened in Washington too, I think, I'm going to get the story wrong, but it won't matter because the key details are true. That it was a German friends of ours. He was walking across Key Bridge from Virginia into D.C. It's just one of the main bridges from Arlington into Georgetown, basically. And he walked to work, and a woman was walking the other way, and she was in flip-flops, and it was raining. And he was struck by the flip-flops, but he was also struck by her. And he just had this incredible sense that he needed to talk to her. So he turned around and he followed her and asked her.
That's how Dante met Francesca.
Why she was wearing flip-flops. It turns out she was coming from a pedicure, but they huddled under an awning for the rain, and,
it happened.
There goes history. Yeah. So anyway, I fear that we're not leaving ourselves open and that we're having too strong ideas about who we have to be or how sure we have to be about ourselves before we can even trust someone to go out for dinner or something.
The best advice I heard, and I may have said it before, is that everybody is insane, but you have to find a person whose madness is compatible with yours. So that's the trick. It's not meeting the best possible person that you could, manage.
Checking off the resume.
Because that could be a disaster.
Yeah.
And no, it's more a compatibility.
Well, we come across some great guests when we have publishers sending us books. Authors sometimes send us books, but publishers also send us books. And I love it because we've found some great people this way. But I'm going to say to book publicists, you kind of have to at least Google the podcast or person before you send them the book. So a book that came to me recently was called Recipes for Self-Love: How to Feel Good in a Patriarchal World by Allison Rachel. And I'm just going to read from the press release. It says, in 2016, Amsterdam-based artist Allison Rachel left her career in advertising to pursue her passion. She began interviewing other women about the ways in which they survive in a patriarchal society. And then she made this an Instagram feed, which became very popular when she posted an original illustration with a few uplifting words to remind women to nurture and care for themselves. And this became popular, but here we are, Christina, talking about maybe you don't have to do all this work before you can have a relationship. And this maybe we're losing. Like maybe we should be more about self-worth and self-value and posting inspirational quotes every day. Because, look, Allison Rachel has this book. And actually, Zoe, do you want to read us some of her aphorisms? We should come up.
I will say first off that I was pretty terrified by the illustrations in this book because none of the women have eyes. I don't know if that was an aesthetic choice.
Well, maybe rule number one of self-love: don't look at yourself.
Perfect. So I'm just going to pick out a few that I thought were interesting.
Okay.
The first is that living in a capitalist world can lead to anxiety and depression. And let me explain why. Capitalism values productivity and output above all else, and as we are raised in this system, we are indoctrinated by it. We tend to see ourselves and others as more valuable, the more successful they are. If you get a lot of things done in a day, you feel good, and sometimes if you spend the whole day lying on the couch, you feel bad. This is an effect of living in a capitalist world that projects the idea that the more productive you are, the more worth you have.
But in a socialist system, you can't be a couch potato because you're forced to go
Make
work
shoes.
make shoes all day.
It's true.
There's the Chernobyl
Well, it's also
dimension.
It's also the capitalist society that it's not like looking at beautiful women in magazines who have been airbrushed make you feel bad about yourself. It's patriarchy and capitalism.
Well, that goes right into the next one, is that men don't get to decide what is sexist.
That's sexist to say that.
That is sexist.
So here we go. It says, cisgendered men will never experience sexism, so therefore they have never been systematically disenfranchised or subjugated by women. And because they've never experienced sexism, it follows that they won't be able to identify it as clearly as a person who actually does experience it. So their logic was, similarly, white people do not get to decide what is racist, and able-bodied people what is ableist.
Well, I'm going to give cisgendered men this book so they can have their first experience of being otherized, demonized, and just...
Okay, is there anything like less ideal? I want like some...
That's
something
an
I
advice
could
book?
embroider onto...
So this is another one I just
What
thought.
what genre is... And this is a success?
Yeah,
This seems like a book that you would find at Urban Outfitters that would be on like the
The
sale
paper
rack.
Urban
So
Outfitters? Attacking
one-
Capitalism, so Urban
Exactly.
Outfitters... Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
this one is called Beauty is a Construct, and I'll explain in a second, but just for background, she does cite Naomi Wolf, the profound scholar. She cites her book, The Beauty Myth,
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
and recommends familiarizing yourself with the work of bell hooks with this.
Yes.
So it says, the idea of a standard of beauty, unrealistic ideals for women and femmes pertaining to looks and behavior, was invented by what author Bell Hooks calls the white supremacist capitalist patriarchy to control and oppress us.
Well, you know what?
1978 feminine.
I would say that standards of beauty in women's magazines were invented by women and gay men.
Emphasis, I think, on gay. Well, my late mother-in-law, who was a really great TV interviewer in Canada, had Naomi Wolf on when The Beauty Myth came out, I guess in the late 80s and maybe very early 90s. Naomi Wolf, who we can describe, I think, fairly as zaftig. She was very beautiful, very curvaceous.
Very important
And
hair.
she was very important hair. She was complaining about the standards of thinness, that were then prevalent. The kind of, I guess, Kate Moss heroin chic. And my late mother-in-law said, I can tell you it wasn't easier to be Sophia Loren in the 1950s. So go on.
Great.
Go on, Zoe.
All right, I've got
What
two
else?
more
What
of
else?
note.
What else do we have to learn?
I'm going to show you the
Self-love.
illustration for this one as well. Our favorite subject, body hair is natural.
Oh, look at that illustration. No, we can't put that up on Instagram. That's
Because
terrifying.
it would be triggering.
And Instagram will take it down because there are visible nipples.
Well, also, I think, to be fair, that looks like a trans woman. The level of hair there
Is violence, and you can't have violence on social media.
Yeah.
Well, it says that we have deeply internalized the idea that our bodies look better hairless from the neck down and often genuinely prefer to be hairless. And while there is nothing wrong with removing your body hair if that's what you prefer,
That's what I prefer.
feminism is about freedom of choice and supporting whatever you decide to do with your body. That being said, body hair is natural and there for a reason. So be aware of why it is that you are choosing to remove your body hair.
Do you think that would be useful to women in Saudi Arabia?
What?
This kind of book.
Yeah.
I mean, they're pretending that it's oppressive because we have beauty standards. These beauty standards are not oppressive. Beauty
Well, also, you
standards-
mean to a woman who was really oppressed?
Yeah.
I mean, actually, to be fair, this would not be the book I would send, but I do believe that valuing yourself and that you are being oppressed by a patriarchy of Saudi Arabia, that's not far-fetched. And as we've seen in these incredible women in Iran who are, hurling off their hijabs and things, like, this is where that message should be directed, but it's not.
No,
not
it's
being
about us
directed.
because we're oppressed because we have to pluck our eyebrows.
Yeah, I mean, plucking is hard.
It's hard.
It's an art.
Well,
It's art,
waxing.
but it's just personal excellence.
Well, what if I could get behind this if it meant the end of bikini waxes?
Well, you don't have to do bikini waxes if you don't want to. If you don't mind looking like
A 70s.
a gorilla.
Do you remember what was the book, the big sex book in the 1970s?
The Joy of Sex.
The Joy of
Alex
Sex.
Comfort. I met him.
You met Alex
Yeah, and
Comfort?
he came on to me, I think.
Whoa, where did you meet him?
I don't know. He was not. It was. No, I'm not.
That book was, okay, so I was babysitting in the 70s. I was a, 13-year-old when it was out. And that book was in every single household that I babysat for. It was just like, that was the book you had. And these people were all married. And you'd open it as a 13 or 14-year-old.
Hairy, misshapen people.
Terrifying.
Hairy,
it was
misshapen
terrifying.
people.
It was like opening a Jane Goodall, Sex Amongst the Apes.
Yeah.
It was such a scary decade. But yeah, anyway.
I was shocked when I went back to see. Well, I didn't. Well, yeah, I did. I went back to see Last Tango in Paris.
Yeah.
And there's the notorious scene with the butter, which we won't mention.
Yeah.
What shocked me most is it was the 70s, and Maria Schneider, the actress, she did not wax.
No, they didn't wax.
And there was a lot there.
They didn't even have pedicures. Okay, is there any more before we move on from these?
I have one that I want to close on.
Okay.
And this one I think is just the hypocrisy and the irony of this entire book is that it includes a page that says never feel guilty about your feelings. We tend to judge our emotions and categorize them as either good or bad, and we also often fully identify with the unpleasant feelings we experience when we don't have to. There is no such thing as a bad emotion or feeling.
Whoa.
Now, I'm
feeling like this is an idiotic book.
Well, I'm feeling that they're trying to guilt you into feeling all of these different things about capitalism and the patriarchy and men.
Yeah, well, capitalism is a bad feeling.
I guess
Men,
so.
well, okay, hang on. Are they
Capitalism
saying, no, they're
and
what
men?
they're saying, that if you're a man, what they said at the beginning was all of your feelings are bad. Because obviously you're feeling this is not men, like if I have a feeling as a neo-Nazi that anybody but white people are inferior and should be eliminated, that's clearly, I don't think Alice and Rachel would endorse that. But what she seems to be saying is that any feeling a woman has
Is legitimate.
legitimate.
Including white supremacist ladies.
Yeah, what about
That's true,
Trump
that's what I'm
ladies?
saying.
What about Trump supporting ladies? I wonder how Alice and Rachel would feel, or are they not?
They should never feel guilty, according to her.
They shouldn't. They shouldn't. Really, anything you believe. I mean, but Christina, should we start a Femsplainers sampler where we just put
Words of wisdom and our aphorisms.
Yeah, I think that you guys
adages.
should.
We need a book.
or just we can put on our Instagram. I can make those little quote boxes. We could say
Perfect.
we had one. There's a meme that goes around on you. I've actually been just waiting for an excuse to use this, so I will. It's as you drinking a glass of wine, saying somebody's put on it. Just deal with it.
Yeah.
So we need to
Just
come
deal
up
with it.
Just deal with it, or your feelings, or what about just not just deal with it? What about just like don't talk about it? Or we don't need to know that about you.
Too much information, keep it to yourself. If you think you shouldn't say it, don't.
Well, she's charging $18 for this book.
See,
so
Christina,
Capitalist oppressor.
this
Exactly.
is how we could pay for a podcast.
Because we need our Patreon supporters to help us. If you want our wisdom and our aphorisms, which are better than those,
Yeah, we could come up with a few, I'm sure.
then please help us. You could even give, I'm thinking even $1, $2 a month. I gave a bum $2 and he was insulted and gave it back to me. That's all we're asking, less than a bum would
Yeah,
accept.
actually, this just led in perfectly to our.
Or should I have said bum? a homeless person.
Homeless person.
Economically different.
Yes, but
Displaced.
we are
Economically displaced. He was a bum.
We didn't intend to bring this pitch in now, but why not? We'll just do it quickly before we get to Bridget Phetasy. That it's true. We, if you really value what we're doing and you like listening to us, we need help. Because we don't want to be homeless as a studio, as a podcast, and to keep us economically viable.
And we're women. We're oppressed. You're patriarchs. Help us.
We're actually women spouting things that not a lot of other female podcasters will spout. But it's true. If every single listener gave $1 a month, $1 a month, that's less even than a bottle of water. It won't even...
That's less... Well, it's $2 less than the wine that I buy.
Yes. Don't reduce Christina to $3. But no, seriously, if every one of you pledged either at patreon.com/femsplainers or wegather.com/femsplainers, you would really help us because we're getting a little concerned, I'm not going to lie, that we can't keep doing this podcast at least without a paywall. So please help us and
support the Femsplainers.
Support the Femsplainers. And in that vein, we're going to bring on Bridget Phetasy, our guest. She is a writer, comedian, and she hosts her own podcast. She's written the advice column for Playboy. And she's written some great relationship columns for Mel magazine. But she's, as we said earlier, she's just an all-round refreshing voice. And
she did have an experience of many years of being addicted to drugs and alcohol. She was in a sex cult in Tangiers. Oh, no, Australia.
No, Australia. Different.
And then she became a darling of conservatives. I don't know how that happened.
Yeah, but she would actually resent that.
Yeah.
Not resented, because she doesn't resent.
No, because liberals like her too.
No, she's undefinable, and that makes her irresistible. So let's bring her on.
Hi, Bridget. It's Christina.
Hi.
How are you?
Hi, Christina. I'm well, thank you.
Hi, Bridget. Welcome to the Femsplainers.
Well, thank you for having me, you guys. I'm really excited.
Well, you've been all over these men's shows, we've noticed.
I know.
Dave Rubin and even Glenn Beck, who I thought he was going to hit on you, honestly, during... He said, you are Ernest Hemingway.
That's too much. I'm never going to write again.
He loved you. And you were with Ben Dominic. How do you say it? Dominic. Dominic?
Yeah.
Dominic?
At the Federalist.
Dominic.
Yeah.
There's a ch there.
Oh, yeah.
And all these guys.
These guys, Bridget, but we need to, get you on a chick show and femsplaining and get you.
I'm excited.
And we want to hear, I think we
both...
should. Go ahead. We're listening.
Oh, you're just both... When I saw that you both were starting this podcast, I was very early into the promoting it and being excited about it because I look up to both of you.
Oh, that's so sweet. And I think I'm especially like Ernest Hemingway, wouldn't you say, Bridget?
Yeah.
Or really the F. Scott Fitzgerald of women's writing.
My cousin and I have already started to just flatten that word because I told all my podcast listeners that they were the Ernest Hemingway of listeners.
Well, this isn't to say, Bridget, I mean, I've just been reading your writing all afternoon, and I could just read it forever. It's not that, actually, it would be awful if you wrote like Ernest Hemingway because, he's so parodied now, and I can't imagine you writing about divorce, men, dick pics. They were hard.
Yeah.
I don't know how.
There weren't a lot of laughs in Mr. Hemingway.
Anyway.
It's too much. I can't live up to that kind of hype. I need to bring it down a notch or two.
Well,
let's start just with a bit of your background, which is so fascinating, and how you managed to become a drug addict at one point and a member of a sex cult.
It was an Osho ashram, so the lineage of the kind of theology or whatever you want to call it behind the cult was the Osho teachings.
Oh, that's the Wild Country. The
Yes,
one that
exactly.
the video with
Yep.
Rajneesh.
You guys are above my head on Christina, you knowing about sex.
I had years ago. I had a friend who was telling me about Rajneesh, and I should go. And fortunately, I didn't. But you did.
So what is it?
She did it by accident. These things happened to her by accident. She wasn't a drug addict on purpose.
So what?
Either.
It's like how I became a conservative darling by accident.
Yeah, well, that's the next thing.
Okay,
and
we're gonna ask you about that next. But tell us about the sex cult, and then I've been reading also a lot what you've been written about addiction, and it's aside from your wonderful, amusing writing style and your comedic style on this, which I even love more, but it's profound, and you've gone through a lot. So yeah, give us a little bit of that background.
I think that I moved a lot, and my parents split up when I was 12, and both were pretty much in new relationships by the time I was 13. We moved pretty far away from my dad with my mom and my stepdad, and then I found drugs and alcohol around that same time.
At 12?
Yes, that's when I first started drinking, which is pretty common when I don't really blame anything. Looking back, and I said this on Glenn, I really think that I have an addictive personality. Even now in sobriety, seeing the way that I operate, I feel like I could get addicted to really anything that either takes me away and helps me escape, or makes me feel good, or
you should have positive
feeling.
Addictions. You need to get addicted to bicycle riding.
I have positive addictions now for sure.
Spin class.
Yeah, exactly. Like running and meditation. I went through this phase where I definitely started worrying about my meditation addiction
I'll never
because I found that I was just using it to escape.
But still, I think neurologically there are obviously addictive personalities. But you moved away from your dad, who you came from an Irish Catholic family, right?
Yes. My dad's one of 10, actually, kids. Mm-hmm. And my grandparents on that side of the family, my paternal grandparents, were my heroes. They were both in Pearl Harbor when it was bombed. My grandfather was in Japan when they surrendered. He was in the Pacific and the South Pacific for the entire war, basically, World War II. And they were just very active in our lives growing up. I moved every year, but we went home to see my grandparents every summer. So that was probably the closest place to a base that I had. And I have 26 first cousins on that side, and I think there were 10 of us born within 4 years. There was a little mini baby boom in the family, and we all grew up spending summers together, and most of my cousins are almost as close as siblings.
Do you have family reunions still?
We did have one, actually, last summer. It was so fun.
Without drinking? You had to go to a family reunion and not drink?
They all drank.
Depends on the family. Well, you were very funny on this. You have a comedic bit about
dating while sober.
Well, no, not just dating, but first, like with your family, because of its Irish Catholic background, that you stopped drinking. Like, good thing, especially given where you were, and you can tell us more about that. And then you go home, and they're like, "Why did you stop drinking?" It's like you've committed a heresy or something.
I know. It's obviously hyperbolic and kind of exaggerated, but also kind of not. My family definitely, there was a little bit of that. You were the best drunk, one of the best drunks this town has ever seen. You never even got a DUI. They didn't understand. There are no consequences.
Well, I like the St. Patty's Day. Like that's where you were
Oh
insulting
yeah, they didn't.
insulting the family.
Yeah. It was like spitting on my grandfather's grave. Your grandfather didn't go to fight in World War II so you could quit drinking bridge.
But go back to the. So you had the childhood was a little chaotic, and you escaped into alcohol and which drugs?
Yeah, I mean, my upbringing, my stepdad was challenging, and I generally don't go too much into any of that publicly just because so many other people are involved, and
Right, we don't need to talk, but what did it lead you to, what drugs did you take?
I started pretty moderately. I mean, moderately for me. I was a daily weed smoker pretty much the minute I started smoking weed. That was and is the thing I miss the most, even in sobriety, but was my true love and savior.
Wait a minute, you don't even smoke weed anymore?
No, I miss it so much.
CBD gummy bears?
Edible?
No, nothing. I can't really do anything that modifies my brain from the neck up. But, CBD water or any of the things that aren't going to be getting me. CBD doesn't really work unless it has some THC. So usually it will make you feel good or a little bit high, but it's I still can't really mess with it. And I have an addictive personality. I will, if I ate one gummy bear, which is also one of my weaknesses in general, I would be eating gummy bears like every day, all day.
Bridget, I don't want to see that obituary. Bridget Phetasy found overdosed on CBD gummy bears.
It's very Hemingway.
It's very Hemingway-esque. Okay, but so you became, you kind of got into everything. I mean, you would, part of your comedy, you would joke about like, I was a heroin addict and then I'd be in rehab and the cocaine people would come in and you're going, oh yeah, like I did cocaine when I was, before.
Like 11th grade.
Yeah.
It was, so you had a terrible period of addiction. And then let's get to the point where you just, what made you decide to give it up and not become another statistic? What was the change? What were you doing?
I was lucky. Honestly, okay, so I don't really talk about this either, but I will because for some reason when you talk to women, it's different. I had a terrible period and hit rock bottom when I was 19. I would not say that was my only rock bottom. I joke that I've had many rock bottoms. That was just the first one. The first big one. And then I had another one. I was married and I got married pretty young at 23. And we were both in the restaurant industry, drinking and doing a lot of mostly cocaine. They go kind of hand in hand in those resort towns. And
was this when you were a waitress? Was this when you were waitressing?
At one point. So I've been a waitress periodically throughout my whole life, essentially.
And what resort town was it?
Yeah.
I just prefer not to say because it's, I mean, it's just my
East Coast
hometown.
or West Coast?
East Coast.
Okay, got it.
And so we were doing a lot of partying, and then I kind of hit another rock bottom and felt like I've lost myself and given up on myself. That was really the persistent feeling that it happened when I was 17. I gave up on myself and said I'm never going to go to an Ivy League school, and that was my only dream. So I kind of gave up on myself and became an A+ drug addict instead. And then I gave up on myself again at 19 when I was in rehab, and gave up on myself again when I was 23, and just kind of resigned myself to a life of being, giving up my dreams. I have no problem with being a waitress and living in a small town and being married. All of those things are great. It was just that I had surrendered all of my other dreams to really the idea had settled for that idea. It wasn't my dream. And then I was partying and doing lots of, I went on for quite a while, and then I didn't talk to my mom for 6 years and started talking to my mom again, and it brought up all this stuff. And I realized that I basically, suddenly felt worthless, and all of these other feelings came up, and suicidal. And I pretty much wanted to die. I did.
I'm just going to tell you, Danielle and I are listening to this, and we just wish you'd been our daughter and come home, and we would have taken care of you. You poor little baby. You had nowhere to go.
Making rocking motions with my arms.
Oh, it's okay.
Because you just felt all alone. You were all alone.
Did you have siblings, Bridget? Did you?
I do, but I'm the oldest of 5.
Oh, so you're the adult.
Well, they're more adults than me, I would say, in many respects. My sister had kids young, actually, and so she was busy raising a family. Oh. And
were you the fun Aunt Bridget or the scary Aunt Bridget? The scary Aunt Bridget.
No, I'm the crazy Aunt Bridget. My 2 youngest sisters, they didn't have a mom either, really. So they I'm not going to turn to the youngest siblings, and I felt a lot of self-loathing and bad about some of my choices. I felt like I knew better because I had been in rehab so young, and now, mind you, this was when I was 35. I was a bit of a train wreck and a disaster, and I would go home and cause all kinds of drama and problems that my family didn't need, or, I was just kind of a train wreck and a mess, and it was embarrassing and humiliating. And then all this other stuff came up, and I had been out east, and I flew back. I was on the plane, and I had decided that I was going to go downtown LA and buy heroin and just kind of end it, because I'd never touched heroin since I quit it when I was 19. And I said, when I landed, I had enough presence of mind to just, the higher voice in me said, why don't you go for a hike before you go buy heroin?
Because it was LA, right?
Well, and looking back, I laugh at it now because it sounds like, so, why don't you go for it? Some little inner wisdom was like, hey, maybe go for a hike before you go kill yourself. But it was that kind of, there are these little, in addiction, there but for the grace of God go I. There are just these little windows of willingness that open, and for some reason I was able to listen to that little voice. I went for a hike. It was horrible. I was sweating out.
I was going to say it was probably hot.
Griffith. It was hot, and then I came back down, but by the time I got to the top of the mountain, I had had enough of a dopamine, serotonin, and I was standing up on this mountain looking out over at the ocean and had some perspective, and I was like, I need a meeting. And so I went to a 12-step meeting that night, and I've been sober ever since.
But it just sounds like you saved your own life. And
so
you knew how to do
actually.
That, and that's what's
not. But you learned. I mean, that's the incredible. This is what's so impressive. Were you still married at this point? Like, what happened?
No, I got divorced when I was 20. So we split up, and I had been trying to get back to LA, and we separated, and then we decided we just both wanted different things. He wanted to stay out east. I had been trying to get back here. So moving forward, I came out to LA to write, and I started doing comedy, and I was writing screenplays and television shows and trying to get either staffed or sell a show or all of these things that are virtually impossible, but I still continue to try. And I then and meanwhile, I had a website, Phetasy.com, which was when I went bankrupt, that's why I went bankrupt. I bankrupted my company, well, it was me personally, and I was selling T-shirts and greeting cards, and then it ended up just basically being this blog that I had for 10 years. But I think that's where I did my 10,000 hours, was on this website where I just wrote for no reason for a decade. And then somebody found me on Twitter in 2013. I went on Twitter. Twitter is part of the reason I got sober, because I kept joking about how I was an alcoholic. And then one day, it all kind of happened at once. My epiphany going home and realizing that you can only joke about that so many times before it's true. And then I ended up getting in touch with the Playboy editor, and that's how that whole trajectory kind of went.
So you could say Twitter sobered you up, which is funny.
Twitter sobered me up. Twitter gave me a career. Twitter is the reason I have everything. Twitter's the reason I'm talking to you. I mean,
that's true. True. But tell us, okay, but so then you went on, and so you've had this chaotic, as you describe it, life, and you
Yes.
become a columnist, an advice columnist, giving other people advice. And I guess you've kind of lived everything. You've had the experience of everything. And I think what we love about your relationship columns, and you've also written them for Mel magazine online, that you approach these advice columns with no ideological agenda or political agenda. There's a very gimlet eye of reason when you talk about the sexes, one of the things I love, by the way, I'm just going to read it from one of your columns. This was in Mel magazine. You had the question of to pay or not to pay for a woman on a date. And you wrote, despite where we're at with gender equality, most women still don't like paying for stuff. They'll act all outraged that I just said that and do a fake reach for their purse on your date. But I promise you, they have $6 in their wallet, and they'll talk about how cheap you are to their friends if you don't pick up the tab. So true. So
it's true.
You come to this gimlet-eyed thing, and you wrote about having to date after you were sober and suddenly going on a date and not having that, easy instant charm injection. Tell us about that.
I'm basically not dating anymore. That was interesting getting
maybe
sober.
You just can't date without drinks. No, I shouldn't say that.
Dating's hard in general. It's hard. I don't like it. I want to be at the part where we're
best friends.
I want to know we're one another's person.
Right.
I'm not good at doing like the in between where we're dating other people. I don't want to do that. So
you're romantic.
Then
you want to go from pedal to metal?
I'm kind of
metal to whatever. Pedal to whatever.
Yeah. I've definitely realized I'm a hopeless romantic, and I do have that idea of that kind of rom-com, dream of finding somebody where you just both know that that's it, and you are like, okay, yeah, the buddy system, this seems to work, and move forward. And often I've found that when that happens with a man, that he's mentally ill.
Or married.
Or married, exactly. One of the two. It's like he's either taken or he's not well.
Or both.
You're in LA now, right, Bridget? Maybe
yeah.
LA problem.
Yeah, I don't think it's good. LA and New York, if you want to meet somebody, people, get out of town, go somewhere else.
Well, you said, actually, I'm going to read you another quote of yours back. You said, I've often joked that if I was a marriage counselor, I'd have couples come in and swipe on my dating apps for 45 minutes and ask them, are you sure you're ready for this? You really can't work it out because this is what you're looking at. So, yeah, okay, so go back. Tell us about dating while sober, because you had some good observations on how you had to, but it was also good, you said, because talk about gimlet eyes. I mean, maybe non-gimlet eyes in this case. You are just suddenly self-aware in ways you haven't been. You wrote about rediscovering yourself in a profound way. So talk a little bit about the transition as a sober person, and then now having to go out and meet people, let alone deal with the dating app scene?
That was interesting because I had never had sex sober. So I felt like a virgin all over again. And I joke that anyone I had sex with pre-sobriety basically doesn't count. I'm like, I've had sex with 4 people.
Yeah.
So because I wasn't really present. So I think in some ways that even though it was awkward and uncomfortable and kind of like, wow, I'm so present in my body and in this experience in a way that I never have been, it's the sex is much better.
Like, but better in what way? Because I think of it as being sort of more warmed up, but you were like, your previous things were like you're passed out or you're just so drunk you don't know where you are.
No, not so drunk. I mean, there were definitely those times too, but more that I'm just present to the whole experience and able to really connect to that person in a way that I didn't feel like I had previously been doing with other partners when I was drunk and high and all those things. I was a little bit detached. I have sexual assault in my history too, so grappling with, I think there was a part of me that was always a bit disconnected from my sexuality. My sexuality and intimacy, I disconnected them at some point. And in sobriety, I've been slowly able to reconnect those things. There was so much shame around my sexuality and sex and my sexual behavior when I was drinking and using drugs. And there was so much shame from things that weren't even my fault. And there was at a certain point, it was like I unyoked intimacy from the whole experience. And when I got sober, I couldn't really run from the fact that I had to like look these people in the eye or, I always joke like intimacy is so creepy. It's just not, it was something that I still struggle with it. And it's interesting. I was talking on Glenn's podcast about sometimes the trolls are right. And the trolls often, they write entire essays about me being this kind of broken woman. And in some respects, they're not wrong. I mean, they're wrong about a lot of stuff. Yeah, no, I agree. And I'm not trying to give them more credit than they deserve. But there are sometimes when I read some of the things they've written, I'm like, yeah, that is true. I did have messed up stepdad. And I did have, I do have daddy issues and mommy issues. And I do have, I did get raped. And those things affect you.
How old were you when you had these sexual assaults? Is this something that's far in your past, or is this something continuous? Because so the big bit, I mean, the big one, people, and I hate to joke about this, but I'll joke about anything, but people are like, girlfriends or people who are closer to me will ask me, like, how many times were you raped? And I'm like, I won at least. Oh, I mean, there was one definitely that I was drugged and raped. And then you wrote about this. Times... You actually wrote about being roofied.
Yes.
Which was chilling. Yeah.
Yeah. And that was, that was the one that probably most profoundly affected me. But then I've been reading my old journals and I'm like, that was definitely not consensual. And there were other things that happened in rehab. When I was in a co-ed rehab for the first week and a guy tried to force me to do it. There's just been a lot of when you're a reckless kind of lost woman, I put myself in a lot of dangerous situations, and doing a personal inventory in in the 12-step program that I'm in, you don't necessarily take responsibility for things that happened to you that you were actually a victim of. But I can take responsibility for the fact that I put myself in very dangerous positions, and it's a miracle that I'm alive. I can also take responsibility to how I reacted to it. So I reacted to getting raped at 17 by becoming hypersexual. I just wanted to run from it. I wanted to run away from the shame. That's when I started using harder drugs. There was a lot of behavior of mine that you could have, if I had had people who were paying close enough attention to me, they would have observed that something is wrong with this girl. She's acting out, and something probably happened, because you don't just act out in a void.
Absolutely.
And then I had stuff, there was a lot of stuff that happened even after that. So I think that I reacted to a lot of that trauma. I'm really lucky. I'm lucky. I put myself in really, really, really dangerous situations. And anytime you're a woman and you're drinking, you're taking a risk. And that's sad but true. That's just sad, but also very true, because I do stand up about this, about how I was pretty much blacked out through like most of my early 20s in particular. And I'm like, the serial killers in the early 2000s were really not doing their job, because I should have definitely come to chained to a radiator or something at some point. Which probably isn't that funny, but no. it's actually, it's true. I was always blacked out, and it's just dangerous.
Now, having had these terrible experiences, what is your attitude towards men? Are you angry at men?
No,
yeah, not really.
How do you come through that? Because the way that many women in your situation come through it, or are encouraged to come through it, is it's not to take responsibility, obviously, because we're seeing this epidemic on campuses with women drinking too much, and exactly this happening, just in different circumstances. And as people say, yeah, well, that doesn't mean, somebody has the right to rape you just because you're blacking out. But if you're the victim and you've decided, not to sue or whatever, how do you overcome that without being angry at men, without blaming men as a sex?
I definitely think a lot of much worse things would have happened to me if there weren't so many good men. So the reason that I say that I'm lucky is not just because I'm lucky, which is also true, but because there were a lot of guys who made sure I got home okay, who put me on the couch, who took care of me when I was drunk, there were many more of those men in my experience than the outliers who behaved badly. And I was drunk for 20 years. So I would say that the number of times some bad things happened to me versus the number of times that men did the right thing and made sure that I had a ride, made sure that I got home safely and up to my door. Even a cab driver picked me up when I was in LA when I was 19 and made sure I got to my hotel. I had no money, and he just did it for free. I've had men I was really drunk getting off of a plane and waiting for my car, and these guys picked me up and brought me to my car. I mean, they could have been anyone, and I should be dead, but they absolutely did the right thing. So my experience is that the majority of people are, in particular men, are good chivalrous men who will defend a woman and or protect her and or make sure that she's safe. That's their instinct to do that.
That's such a profound point, and so true. And I've spoken at college campuses, and there'll be people raging against men, and they'll point to this one and this one and this one. And I'll always say, well, I'm not saying there aren't terrible men out there, but I just want to ask you, how many men were the opposite and were good to you? Your fathers, your brothers, did men do gallant acts and protective acts. And they would usually have to say yes. And it's somehow we've forgotten that. We've forgotten the...
Well, it's also, you could take this from, I don't even want to call it a feminist viewpoint. You could take this from a view of why let the bad men win? If you wanted to go full feminist and say, there are no good men, this is what men are, sex is innately oppressive, and I will never have an intimate relationship with a man because you can't, because they're going to dominate you.
They're toxic.
Or you could say, why let the rapist win? Why let these bad win? Why are they going to deprive me of a meaningful relationship with the opposite sex, and ideally finding someone who is... And that's sort of what's remarkable in your relationship columns and your advice columns, because you do seem to have a very, not just realistic, but a very sympathetic view of both the male and female point of view. And you've written, Colin, I don't even want to say about
that one.
Instructing men on how to bring women to pleasure.
In a certain way.
In a certain way. You wrote The Divorce Dude's Guide to Dating and Why Do Women Behave This Way. Like, you seem to have come out of this in a very non-angry...
It made you more human and
way.
generous to just the human predicament.
And so do you have advice on that, like with women who have been through bad things?
I think, yes. Well, I don't know that I can only say what worked for me, and a couple of things. If you want equality, from my perspective, if I want equality, then I have to acknowledge that women are just as capable as being shitty as men, that we're just as duplicitous, we're just as much of liars, we're just as opportunistic. There are just as many. I can be just as much of a human as a man. By putting a man on this pedestal and saying that he's evil and saying that women are not capable of the same amount of evil, that in and of itself is inequality, and I refuse to play that game. I just think I'm capable of just as much goodness and evil as a man. So every time I hear this, like, men are evil, men are bad, I just don't agree that women are somehow less than capable of being just as bad as men. So right from that perspective, you're already putting men above you on some kind of platform just by saying that they're worse than you, that they're capable of being worse than you. That's not true. Secondly, if you want to fight toxic masculinity, you have to show up with compassion for men. This is the other thing I do not understand. All of this raging about toxic masculinity, and then you're telling men that they're pieces of shit. I don't know if I can swear on this podcast, but then you're telling them what garbage they are. And how is that helpful? I mean, which one is it? Are you telling them? Are you asking them to be honest and vulnerable and express their feelings, or are you telling them that they're garbage and to shut up and that they don't have a right to speak in society? You don't get to have both. So,
or when they're not garbage, they're rapists, but I'm thinking more from you that you were. I mean, I hope you've said you've given up dating. I hope it's not just because of the apps.
I'm just busy. Honestly, it's not that I've given it up, and I'm not like, it takes so much. Dating takes so much time, going on the date and all this stuff. I'm just busy. I'll meet someone when I meet someone. I've been married. I'm not somebody who's looking for this. I would love to be in a loving, supportive relationship, but it's not something that I feel empty without. I feel very full of life and joy and purpose with my work and just being able to help other people who are struggling with addiction and all kinds of ways that I can give of myself. So I'm just busy, really, and that's fine. But in terms of women who have been through traumatic experiences or might feel, men have to deal with this too. And I see this, it's bitterness. So men and women, doesn't matter. Again, I can speak to myself, but I see it in men who have been hurt by women, whether they've been cheated on or they've been dumped or rejected. we are all responsible for our own bitterness and our own resentment and all of these things that if we allow them to fester in our souls will poison us over time and make us toxic human beings. And that bitterness, I did not want to become a bitter woman who was angry at the world. I had very many reasons to be angry at women as well, but I addressed a lot of those when I was in rehab, surrounded by amazing women, and who essentially told me that I couldn't really begin to love women until I started loving myself. Great point. I also had to address a lot of my anger towards men, but I just think anger towards anyone in general is not healthy, and that if you're feeling that, whether it's for women or men or any of the 52 genders, you should definitely go seek outside help and try and get to the root of that and find ways to, whether it's, Buddhism and compassion, whether it's religion, whether it's yoga, there's a lot of spiritual practices. There's a lot of people use mantras, people use scream therapy, whatever might work for you to kind of draw that poison out. It's that whole idea that the poison is also the medicine. It does end up healing you. And that's kind of what I feel like our job as humans is to heal ourselves and hopefully help others to heal. Being human is hard.
But you know what comes through in your writing and your interviews and so forth is you do have a lot of compassion and understanding. And you don't rush to simple explanations. You always see the human complexity. And that's increasingly rare. People are just so eager and just can't wait to rush to a simple story of good and evil. And you don't do that. And that's remarkable.
Well, is it, Bridget, and I totally agree with Christina. So I know we're being aware of time, that
we're fine.
When you look at the landscape today of the whole millennial sex recession, that men and women maybe have never been at this point of alienation from each other, and you give great advice. What would be your advice on this, especially to people, this generation that is struggling incredibly with addiction, with depression, and now with each other?
I would say we do have this tendency, and I have to fight it. It's easy to do online because we're all cartoon caricatures of ourselves online. And it's easy to see one another as two-dimensional, and we forget that very simple walk a mile in someone's shoes before you judge them. I love Chloe Valdery. She's a brilliant writer. You've probably heard of her or read her.
But she came to my house. She met Izzy. She's had the whole
I love her.
immersion.
So she has this program that she launched, her course, The Theory of Enchantment, and one of the kind of core principles is to stop viewing people as political abstractions. And I wish everyone would take her course because it's very grounded in compassion and loving one another and meeting people with love. And that is a practice. It's not necessarily where I instinctively go, and particularly online when you're separated by ones and zeros and computers and you don't have to face anybody eye to eye, woman to woman, man to man. You can just lash out in whatever ugly way you want to lash out. So taking a minute to pause and remember that there is, unless it's a bot or you're fighting with a troll or someone who's not good faith, usually there's another human on the other end of that, and they might be having generally when you reach out to people and say, hey, what's going on, if they're lashing out or you get out of that cycle of attacking one another and drop into the humanity, you'll find that you can meet on common ground. So I think the challenge for everybody is to really try to be more compassionate. But I think a lot of it is, in my observation, a lot of it is coming from this self-loathing. So if you hate yourself, it's so much easier to hate everyone else. You're going to project that out onto the world. And this a lot of what I'm seeing especially the younger, more progressive in general on that side of the political aisle, is this sense of self-loathing, victimhood, perpetually being victimized. Those, from a therapeutic point of view, are things that you should be trying to heal and overcome, not things that you should allow to grow and to lean into. You should be leaning away from those and using and trying to overcome your sense of persecution and your sense of self-hatred, because you will project it out onto the world and it won't make anything better.
What if you're like you're somebody who's compassionate, you're not going to fall into this trap, but you want to meet someone? Like, this is the depressing thing. I mean, you wrote about the apps. You wrote about, this is so gratuitous, but I have to quote you on this because it's one of the funniest things I read. Like, men who send you dick pics and how common that is for young women. I mean, I guess even Jeff Bezos, right? But you wrote, I'm more offended at how awful the pictures are. No one wants to see a small, poorly lit, flaccid penis tangling in a jungle of gnarly pubes. So you're in this, even if you're the best intentioned young woman, you know, in this world, as you say, of apps and dick pics. Can you meet someone offline? Like, what do they do? What do these women do?
We have to bring back square dancing.
Yeah. We do need to bring back square dancing.
I actually went to a club in D.C. with gay square dancing. It was so fun.
You're not going to meet a man if you're
No, but I had a blast.
Yeah, well, okay. But
I think that people, my cousin joined one of those, you know, local, what are they? They're just like sports. She plays touch football and it's co-ed. And she's created this amazing community of friends and met people. And I think getting out in the world and just putting yourself out there and doing maybe common interests like hobbies, and maybe you join a tennis league, maybe you join a chess league, take a class, do something that you're interested in, not necessarily
bird watching.
Go to a bar and drink.
No, I'm serious.
then they're all 900 years old.
They're hot. They're hot.
Yeah, for you, Christina. You love those guys in the tweed caps and the binoculars.
Well,
They're kind of creepy.
They're pretty cool.
But yeah, no, you're right. I mean, I was talking to somebody the other day about, we all thought books were dead, you know, except maybe as audiobooks, and it was all going to be on the screen. And then you realize there's been a revival of books because, not least, I think, because it gets you offline. Like, you can sit and read a book and you don't have any pings and you're not tempted to do something else. And you go into that, you know, as they say about books, and then you're transported to another world. And I mean, I think the struggle, and maybe we're self-solving it but slowly, is to pull ourselves offline and, as you say, into the real world. But
yeah, I volunteer a lot when I can. I love volunteering. You'll meet great people. I think doing things in environments where you are working towards a greater good. So even you can still meet somebody going out and drinking in a bar. That's not, I know many, many people who have met that way. I also have many friends who have met on dating apps and Tinder, and they're married now, and it's an easy way to, so I don't want to totally negate the ability to meet somebody online. It definitely is the most common way people meet. And weirdly now, you're kind of like a serial killer if you walk up to somebody and just try and start a conversation with them in a bar.
Well, look, Bridget, we met online. Let's face it.
yeah.
We all met online.
Yeah.
Well, I met Danielle in the real way. But speaking of Danielle, just as a final comment, I'm going to, after this program, I'm going to take her on a hike to show her that there's an alternative to martinis.
I'm not drinking a martini.
Well, what are you drinking?
Right now, I've moved to La Croix lime juice, but I did have quietly had a gin and tonic while Bridget was talking. You're the one pouring the red wine, girl.
So what is an alcoholic? I just want to know quickly. What is it? Is an alcoholic someone who likes a few glasses of wine?
You had a good description, Bridget. Weren't you like early on in rehab and they said, if you think you have a problem, you have a problem?
I mean, yeah, that's kind of how I feel. I don't feel like you can label anyone else an alcoholic. I would.
Did I just label myself?
No,
an
you know what
alcoholic?
Christina is, Bridget. I was hoping you'd help me with this. She's a Twitter-aholic, and you gave up Twitter for Lent, and you became, what, healthier? She said
Thinner.
you had more energy. She became thinner. She had more energy. Can you just, before you go, just give her a little, 12-step coaching pitch to get off Twitter
For
part-time?
weekends?
I can, although I'm not much better. I have a serious problem, and it's my probably biggest addiction now and still. But what was the name of it? I have it right here.
Take your
Irresistible by Adam Alter, and he writes beautifully about.
Oh, I know
social
Adam
media.
Alter. Yes.
What's it called? Irresistible?
Yes.
Yeah, great.
So he wrote.
great thing.
He's just so good, but he has really good guardrails to kind of put around yourself when you have a social media addiction, and ways to counteract what the apps and the algorithms are preying on, which is like our basic instincts.
Yes.
So, for instance, he would say, put your phone in another room an hour before you go to bed, and don't look at it until after you've woken up and you've been up for an hour, and maybe you've done a little stretching or meditating, or put yourself in a.
Oh, man, that's
Stop.
hardcore.
I'm hyperventilating already.
hardcore.
Stop.
I have to look at the Daily Mail right away at 5:45.
Have you ever awakened in the middle of the night and thought, oh, I'll check my...
Oh, yeah, hour later.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, man,
I
we're
was
both
joking
a little
the other day.
hardcore. You with
hard-
Twitter, but I think we're all online too much.
Too much.
Oh, yeah.
I'm trying to... I'm going off on weekends. But what is a weekend?
She's already negotiating the weekend. All right, it's bad.
Saturday to Sunday
Yeah.
morning.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
You could just do the Jewish Saturday
Yeah, the
Shabbat thing.
Shabbat.
Friday night to Saturday. Anyway, Bridget, it's been such a pleasure talking to you. I hope you'll come back. I hope you'll visit.
I would love to.
If you come to D.C., we're here. We'll make mocktails.
Yes.
We would love to.
Mocktails.
Mocktails are great.
Yeah.
They
My
are
favorite
good.
one is the mojito. It's so refreshing.
Well, we would love to see you, and but thank you, and really thank you. Everybody should just just Google Bridget and with a
Oh,
P.
God.
Go to her podcast and follow her on Twitter. And
and also,
oh, wait a minute, we're supposed to go off Twitter, but follow her anyway.
but yeah, and I think we need a better, like, she's not Ernest Hemingway. She's the Edith Wharton. Let's get a female analogy.
Yes, yeah. What's with that
Let's
mansplainer?
not compare me to famous writers. How about that? Because I do need to write another. People are going to read the next thing I write and be like, really? This piece about boobs. And,
That's your next piece. I'm waiting for that.
Waiting
You've been
for the
commissioned a
boobs.
piece about boobs.
Oops.
yeah,
All right.
I'm working on it.
Okay, Bridget,
working
thank you
on it.
so much.
All right. Thank you so much.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
After all that, we got so interested in Bridget's, what do we call it, journey, her journey, that we ended up, we never got to the sex cult. Well, she wrote about it, right?
It wasn't really, it was an accident. She thought it was, she was lost in Australia and she needed a place to stay. She thought that it was an ashram, and then it turned out to be a sex cult.
And she escaped, obviously. 'Cause
Well, she
she's on
kind
our
of
podcast.
liked it for a few weeks, but she escaped
Oh, wow.
eventually.
Well,
no,
okay,
I don't know.
but she
we don't know. We
did
don't-
write about it,
Yeah.
so I'm
in
sorry.
a funny way. It was an
sorry, it's
an
online.
accidental cult experience.
Online, but yeah. Anyway, we have time for the quickest listener reaction. Zoe.
Yes. So we've gotten a lot of good ones lately. This one in particular, I think, is one of my favorites we've received. It's coming from Thomas. So he said,
Mansplainer.
Dear Femsplainers, I have to give thanks to a clickbait article written by a rabid left-wing journalist, in quotation marks. I apologize that I don't remember the author's name, but it was the article was titled something along the lines of The 5 Worst Conservative Podcasts.
I believe it was 10, but we did come in at number 3.
Yes. So Femsplainers was listed as number 3.
Yeah.
If it weren't for my curiosity and the author's venom, I might have never run across your podcast. The only reason I clicked on it was for the purpose of discovering the author's intent. After the first sentence or two, it became about discovering podcasts that I knew I would enjoy and had yet to discover. 2 of the others listed were Louder with Crowder and The Ben Shapiro Show. I'm not equating those with yours, as you may disagree with either or both of them.
Those are mansplainers.
Yes.
They're fine, but they're mansplainers.
But he said, just letting you know that I now enjoy listening to you and that you're, in my opinion, in good company. Thank you and keep up the good work.
Well, there's no such thing as bad publicity. No, we put that out over social.
I think
glad you found us, Thomas. Thank you.
And I'm saying, like, they had all these terrible things to say about our podcast, but the last sentence was, surprisingly, the audio quality was fantastic.
That's all to you.
And I said, thank you. I feel like Nat and I are doing our jobs.
Our audio editor, yes.
And his example of how we were so wayward is that we interviewed conservatives like David Brooks.
Right. And that awful writer,
David Frum. I said it sounded so Trumpy, the article.
I know. And also it sounded like we only ever had men on, which is not true. Anyway, okay, moving on. Next one. Thank you, Thomas. Welcome to the Femsplainers.
So this one came from Facebook. We got a lot of feedback about Christina's Busy Phillips drama.
Yeah, which I deleted.
Yeah, but then I posted
She
a
posted
video.
it.
I started it all over
Started
again.
it all over.
Well,
I had death threats.
Hector.
I had death threats because
Okay.
never mind.
well, your Facebook supporters did not have any death threats for you. So this came from Jeremy. Jeremy says...
Jeremy, another mansplainer.
Another mansplainer. Christina has a lot of mansplainer fans.
Yeah. We're femsplaining for mansplainers.
Exactly. So he said, this is total nonsense, referring to Busy Phillips. Men don't shame women for talking about their periods. We just can't commiserate with a bodily function that we don't experience. Why do modern feminists say that they don't want men to control their bodies, yet when we show a lack of interest in their bodies, it's considered offensive?
Or too much interest in other parts of the body.
Right.
There's no winning, guys.
There's no
just
winning.
no winning. Accept it.
Because I think when we discussed the vasectomies on this podcast, we weren't really commiserating with an experience that we don't have, our tool stools.
And
But we could imagine it. We could
I can't
put ourselves
still
in
can't
that
quite imagine
situation. All right, this came in, and by the way, anybody who does this is just like gets an award as a femsplainer.
Yes, please send them. I check our mailbox every day, and I was so excited.
Mailbox. This is beautiful stationery. It's on a little card with cocktail champagne, like champagne cocktails, and it says, "Dearest Femsplainers," and a beautiful handwriting, by the way. I thought it only appropriate that mail to you 2 ladies have class, whimsy, femininity, and a recipe for a killer cocktail. On the liner of the envelope is a recipe for a cocktail called French 75.
Oh, I love those.
Which has champagne. You know what? Since Bridget doesn't drink, and we always have a cocktail every week for our guest, this will be our cocktail.
Well, what's
from
it?
Rachel?
French. It has champagne and what else?
And gin or cognac. That's a weird either or, right?
Gin is better.
Okay, thank you. And lemon juice and simple syrup. Anyway, we'll post it.
We'll try it.
I put a little Saint Germain in it when I make it, and it's really
Germain
good.
makes everything better. It says, I cannot tell you how much I love and appreciate your podcast. Until I started listening last year, I was hesitant to call myself a feminist because of all the baggage it seemed to entail. Now, Christina, now I think of myself as a proud Danielle Crittenden feminist. Oh, you were dissed. My term for someone who supports and appreciates women as women with all the diversity and ambiguity that entails. I think we can call it a Crittenden Summers feminist.
Crittenden Summers feminist.
Summers Crittenden. I don't care. Feminism doesn't have to be about a set of grievances. It can be about taking best advantage of a set of sometimes mixed blessings and helping other women do the same. All that to say, I love the Femsplainers. Regard, Rachel. And she says, my favorite cocktail is, in fact, a French 75. And the recipe is here. Cheers. Rachel, thank you. That is maybe one of the great listener reactions. We've received compliments and a drink recipe.
And it was a wax seal on the envelope.
Oh, yes. Oh, my God.
I had so much fun opening it.
Seal. That's true. Oh, my goodness. All right. Well, thank you. We love you. We love all of you. And we hope you love us and support, like us on Facebook and iTunes and all the podcast platforms. And think of that $1 that you just wasted giving to somebody with a guitar case.
Yeah. It could have been us.
We're so much more talented.
We try. And think of patreon.com or wegather.com. And thank you. We love you and see you next week.
We're going for a hike. No!
Hey, thanks for listening to the Femsplainers. Stay with us by following us on Twitter and Facebook at Femsplainers and on Instagram at Femsplainers Podcast. You can always email questions and comments to contact@femsplainers.com. We read every one.
We are recorded at the American Enterprise Institute in Washington, D.C. And thanks to AEI Research Assistant Zoe Appler, who is our production assistant here in the studio, and thanks to Nat Frum, our audio and video editor, and occasional millennial mansplainer.
And listen to us on pretty much any of your favorite podcast platforms. And please remember to subscribe and like us at iTunes if possible. Every like helps us keep our solid 5-star rating. Cheers.